everyone. This is Bill Gardner. I'm very excited to interview him today. He's a smart ass, as you can see. He's the founder of Logo Lounge, which is a huge logo gallery, which I've been a part of for a good decade now, as well as an incredible book series, Logo Lounge, which is, I don't even know how many there are now, like
Which
15?
you've also been we're working on 12 right now.
12, yeah. So it's crazy.
Yeah.
So Bill has a lot to share in the world of logo design and branding. He also runs a brand agency, Gardner Design. And yeah, we have a ton of questions for you. I'm just going to start off with an easy one, an icebreaker. What's your favorite color, Bill?
It's got to be that lovely shade of magenta behind you.
Oh, that is a nice one.
I've got a comment on the magenta behind you. What you don't realize is that Jake and I have been talking here for a couple of minutes, and I was actually watching. He and his wife constructed that in the background out of construction paper in the last few minutes just before we got on set. And if it starts to kind of crumple up a little bit, you forget it. But you guys are just structurally amazing. I don't know how you do that. You know, you do so many things that amaze me.
Made out of triangles.
We'll go with orange. We'll go with orange. Yeah.
Yes,
that's what
I knew that one.
You wore that just for Logo Lounge, didn't you?
I did. And I'm not sure if it complements the pink or not. Maybe if it was yellow, but we'll go with it.
I think you've got a whole new palette kind of working there. It's all good.
Yes. Well, another icebreaker question is, can you do a magic trick for us? We hear you were a magician in your past.
Man, are we going to do that right from the beginning? Yeah, we could.
We could. Well, we could save it. We can save it. My interesting tidbit, my father is a magician as well. So.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah. So I grew up around magic. Sorry?
Did he make a profession of it?
Yes, he's been doing it since he's 21. So he's, nonstop.
So you grew up with it in the house?
Yeah. It's a very eccentric house. It's filled with like stuff everywhere, like tigers, Smurfs, like card tricks, everything. So it's, I think you and him would get along very well. It's a bit of a smart ass.
And he is too, is he? Okay.
Yeah, he's a comedy magician.
Yeah. Does he still perform?
Yes, he does. He does a lot of, it's like half corporate, half cruise ships. So yeah, he went through like he does a 1 hour show, but he used to do like all the big illusions, like turning elephants into motorbikes and all that sort of stuff. So it's really cool.
So that was actually the way I put myself through college, was doing magic. And,
amazing.
So it's very familiar to me when you say that your dad does cruise ships and corporate entertainment. That really is where the money is in magic, is in corporate entertainment. You can count on two hands the number of magicians that really have made it.
Yeah, exactly.
Public kind of magician, that really have been able to fund their life that way. And when you start thinking about it, those magicians that make the best money end up working trade shows and the likes, and they work 24/7, 365 days a year, and they're really excellent with people. So I'm sure your dad probably is the same way.
Yeah, totally. And there's different ways. Like there's corporate magicians, and they're a little bit under the radar. Then there's like the public ones, like in the shows that you mentioned. So yeah,
if I were to say the name Paul Gertner, your father would know immediately who I was talking about, because he's one of the great corporate magicians. So I worked for a gentleman named Joe Stevens, who's kind of the godfather of magic. He owned a magic shop back here called Stevens Magic Emporium, no more than about 5 doors down the street from where I am right now. And I started working for him right out of high school, after I snuck backstage after a magic performance. Magician left all of his props there. I'm still in high school. We get into the props. We start figuring them out. We're doing the shows for the janitors and the custodial staff with the stuff that got left behind. And it gets its teeth into you. And it was a great way to earn money during college and to meet people. But it also meant that we got to travel, and Joe Stevens put on something called the Desert Magic Seminar, which was in Las Vegas. And it happened every year at exactly this time, March 17th. And it was done in conjunction with Siegfried and Roy and David Copperfield, and these are all people that I hung with, during that period of time. I've got some really terrible pictures of myself with Siegfried and Roy, if you really want me to pull them out.
That's
But
cool.
it gave me the chance to kind of visit with magicians from around the world. So yeah, I did pull out a trick for you because somebody
Okay,
forewarned me
good.
that.
I was waiting for that.
So do we want to go ahead and throw it in here now and just get
Yeah,
it done with?
let's do it.
Okay. And it kind of hurts me now that I know that you are the son of a magician, because I know, and your audience may not realize this, but every child of a magician has had to suffer through a million card tricks, or has had to suffer through a million. Tell me which is better, doing it this way or this way?
Yep.
And I'm positive you did that growing up. Is that true?
Yes, among other things, but a lot of hand play, like behind the ear sort of stuff, and magic tricks disappearing, all that. Rabbits. We still have rabbits and ducks and doves at our house.
Do you really?
Yes.
There's one smell you can never get rid of, and that's when rabbits pee.
Yeah. We thankfully it's around the side of the house, so we do not have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My college roommate was a magician as well, and had a rabbit that peed in the back of his car, and all throughout college, every time he got in that car, just
Yes. Yeah.
one of those things. Okay, so just for your audience, I'm already sitting here kind of realizing that you're going to know exactly where this goes, which is this idea of just taking some cards and how you make a deck of cards vanish. And this is really kind of fun because one of the easy ways to make cards vanish is just to start removing them. Makes sense. If you do this enough times, eventually you've made a deck of cards vanish. But there's another way you can do this, which looks a little bit more like this.
There they are.
Cards
Very good.
smaller.
There you go. All right, I think we can just leave it here now. We're done.
Yeah, we could. We're done. Hey, hang on. Little bit smaller.
Oh, look at that. Wow.
Yeah.
Close-up magic.
Hang on. Yeah. Huh? Oh, we could. Okay. Here.
You're in the wrong industry.
Everybody can see this just exactly how easily this
Amazing.
works. Little bit smaller. Hang on. Just for you, just for your dad. I love this. This is always when you can have him pick a card.
Wow.
Yeah. Hang on.
What? You can't get smaller than that.
Okay.
Geez.
Blow.
Wow. Vanished.
There you go.
Wow.
Hey, make it
That's
more
impressive.
There
That's a
you
good one. Very
There
good.
you
I will. I'll show him. Make you proud.
go. Enough
Well,
doing magic.
Yes. Well, we can get into the business stuff. So I've got a bunch of questions from my audience. I sent a message out on my Facebook group, and I got a ton back. So we'll go through them. The first one was, what makes a great client for you?
One that has enough money to do it right. No, there are a lot of good answers for that. But, about 2/3 of the branding work that we do is rebranding. And you tend to find that when you're working on a rebrand, that somebody has reached a point where they have enough cash to be able to actually do it right. And you usually find this is somebody that either through poor stewardship over time, or because they have maybe lost track of exactly where their North Star is a little bit off, and it's trying to help them resonate again, or to build relevance again with an audience. And it gives you a chance to go back and work with the equity they've got. And really, one of the things that I think so many designers recognize is that you've got to be really cognizant of the equity that a company has built up over time. They may be coming to you and saying, we need to rebrand, but what they're really doing is they're just saying, I can tell that the clothing that we're wearing is a little out of date. We
Yep.
recognize that we've got to do something to freshen it up.
So you
Do you
you
find
mainly
that
work with people that are or with brands that have been established for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool.
And that comes from the redesign of their products to their fleet graphics, their website, all aspects of the brand, obviously. But I'll tell you the other thing that we just do a huge amount of anymore is nomenclature. And I used to tell people as a designer we're only licensed to put up to 3 words together. That we really can't craft much more than that. But we've got some really smart individuals here, and we do a lot of name development for entities. You'd be surprised how many companies are going through that.
So what does your studio look like these days? So how many people do you have, and what's your role in it?
Yeah, so there's 10 of us here on a good day. It's a 2-story building here at the back, and you're kind of looking up the front. And if you actually look back through there, you'll see up. I'm kind of in a fishbowl, and you can see up to the front.
All I see is a pink background.
Yeah, that hang on.
Your green screen's broken. I knew that would come in handy.
Yeah. How's that? It's 10 of us, and the majority of us are designers. We've got a couple of folks that are upstairs. There's a second level that is Logo Lounge that manage Logo Lounge. This is all Gardner Design downstairs. And Ryan Weems, who's my senior art director, and Adam Anderson, who's senior art director. Joe Hansen and Ellen Mosman, designers, Jay Walter on internet development.
Talented bunch.
Say that again.
A talented bunch.
Yeah.
Emily
Wilkie, it's a great group, and we're typically all here together and right on top of each other. But as of today, we're working a little bit remotely. So,
do you do any designing yourself these days?
Yep. Obviously not as much as I did in the foundation of the business. Our designers are so much more talented than I ever was. You know this, and I mean, you get this from talking to people, that really one of the proudest moments you can have, and you'll have this, with your own child, is when they exceed your talents and your capabilities, and people tell you how wonderful your child is, and it just makes you feel so really good. You're the same way when you own a business, and you have talented people that work for you, and you want them to have success. And there's nothing that gives me a greater sense of pride than to walk in. I used to say when I would walk in with my logos and some of my designers' logos, we were showing them off, and they would pick one of my designers' logos, and I'd go, "Thank God, it really is the best."
Yeah, it is great. That's a very humble thing to say as well. And
Sure.
Yeah. And I already see it. Like, my son's only 15 months, and he's starting to say a few words, and you're like, yes, got a few words. Although he's just been saying, yeah, he's got a long way to go, but we're getting there.
Have you taught him the 7 trick yet? Some friends of ours taught us this trick early on, and all your listeners can do this with their kids too. When they were taking their child around to somebody else's house, and the other parents would go, "Well, Roger can say his ABC. Say your ABCs." And he'd start running through the ABCs, and they'd look at their son, and they'd go, "What's the square root of 49?" They'd go, 7. So all we did taught our daughter, whenever we asked you a question, the answer is 7.
That's the trump card.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It works.
That's awesome. All right. Well, what's to pivot around to logo design versus clients? What are your main rules? Well, I guess we were talking about logo design, so no pivot in here. What are your main rules for a good logo design?
So I often tell our own designers, and not everybody that we bring in that ultimately becomes a great designer starts out that way, but you can see that nugget in them that they get the aesthetic, and that you can kind of hone them there. And one of the things that we do is we often talk about the rule of three, which is this idea of a logo needs to live on three different levels. Um, and it's that when the consumer looks at it in a very facile, very first quick view, that they get the essence of what it's trying to convey. They may see something literally in it, um, but over a period of time, or maybe it's also immediately, they start to see a second message in it, and hopefully a third message that's in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it forces you to move away from being incredibly literal in what you're designing. It's very easy for somebody to say, okay, it's a shoe company I'm designing for, so I'm going to draw a picture of a shoe. It'll be a beautiful shoe,
Mm-hmm.
beautifully drafted. But if that's the extent of what you have to say about them, then you're not digging very deep. If it starts to integrate the texture of a signature leather that they work with, if it starts to integrate some like a pair of Louboutins, the color red on the bottom of the shoe, or if you're able to craft that shoe out of taking the negative spaces around it and filling it in with a heel or parts of the shoe in there, so that ultimately a person sitting there looking at it, they go, yeah, it's a shoe. Oh, I see. It's made, it's constructed out of this, and that's their pattern, or this is their signature letter that's built into that. All of these things give the viewer that opportunity to have that aha moment, that they start to, you've been there before. It's that song that you've heard a million times before, that all of a sudden you hear a lyric in a way that you've never really caught it before.
Mm-hmm.
Take ownership in that song. And it's the same way with a brand. It's how you build that ownership in that visual aspect of that brand, is when people start to invest themselves in it.
Yeah, for sure. And I totally agree. I love striving for next level or deeper levels in logos. So rather than just surface level, and having something clever or memorable hidden within the logo that's actually relates back to the brand's essence. I think that's very well said.
And it doesn't always have to be. I mean, we've done incredibly successful marks that word marks, or logos that have been a bit more literal.
Yeah,
But I think that whatever you do, you have to keep in mind that your consumer is intelligent, and that you want them to be able to feel like they're being spoken to in an intelligent fashion, and that they give give them the credit that they're going to be able to figure something out without giving it to them in such a rote fashion that they don't have any investment in it.
totally, for sure. All right. So what is actually your logo design process these days?
Sure. Um, so typically the first third of the process is before we ever start to do any computer design or any pencil and paper. It is just purely the discovery process. And I'm trying. If your listeners are familiar with LinkedIn Learning,
Yeah,
um, we've go there and type in Bill Gardner, and you can actually walk through my process. It's in
yeah,
there,
that's
a
true.
number of different videos, but the the idea is that your effort, whatever you end up putting together for that client, is only going to be as good as the information that you walk into it with. And the discovery process is that period of time that we spend with the stakeholders in a project, with their clients, with the competitors, really looking at the brand environment, and we develop a personality profile for them. I don't know how many of your listeners have ever spent time looking at Jennifer Aaker's brand personality quotients, but we use those to start to identify those traits that associate with a client that we need to draw out of the logo visually. And ultimately, we put together a brief that goes to the client, and that brief serves a couple of purposes. One, it lists out what you believe the objectives are for this based on what your clients told you. It gives the client a chance to agree or to modify or disagree with what you've presented to them. But ultimately, this document serves as the foundation for the designer to design from, but more importantly, it serves as that checklist once you're presenting, so that as you present this to them and they say, did you think about doing so-and-so? We're going, no, we didn't discuss it. We certainly can. There will be an additional fee for that. We can go down that road, but you know, they understand that this document was put together because it is the objectives. And if they disagree with the look of the logo, or if they don't like it personally, or if it's got a bird in it and they hate birds, fine, they're not the client.
Yeah.
These are the objectives. Does it meet the objectives? And it keeps disagreements to a minimum in here, because they understand that, you know, there's greater value to this process. Years ago, I discovered that somebody has more of a challenge paying a few dollars for something that you or I draw, but they're perfectly willing to pay for a 10-page document of text that explains why you did what you did. And pay much more for that.
So thinking, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So don't, to all of your watchers, your viewers, don't cut yourself short, because that really is what you're bringing to the table, is that front end. Then the design. Our designers typically will spend, not solid through, but typically will take about 3 weeks, a month. Oftentimes, we're always running multiple projects at one time, but it gives you the time to do some design, let it incubate a little bit, to play it around with other designers, to see what their take is on it. And you might have the same answer I do here, which is that oftentimes the solution that is the best, or that you end up with, may have been something that you came up with minutes before that meeting.
That's true.
Yeah, it's down. I mean, you're always working things, but I think that the human is kind of forced into this production mode, and they do their very best work in some of the last minutes. Not suggesting you put it off for the last minute, but
yeah, or the first few minutes,
or the first. You're right. Isn't that funny? It usually happens on one or the other end of the equation. Yeah. That's it. Just do the beginning and the end, and skip the middle part, something else, and you can make a whole crap load more money.
That's true. Very true. I want to go back to the personality thing, because I'm sure a lot of people may not be aware of it. So do you want to give some insights into your process there with the personality side of things?
Look up Jennifer Aaker, and I'm going to spell that last name, which is Aaker. And she and her father also is a professor of marketing. They're both at Stanford, but Jennifer in 1997 developed a theory that we pretty much work by, which is that much as you know an individual to have a personality, and you can imagine different people that you might want to go out and have a beer with, or somebody else that you may want to go to if you had a moral crisis, or you kind of picture these different people in your mind and what they're like. She said, we believe that we can take brands and break them into personality types as well. And it gives you, it's kind of an interesting way to look at this, because she said there are basically 5 personality dimensions to a brand. And when you look this up, you're going to find that there's a great deal of study that goes behind this. Each one of those dimensions has a series of traits that are associated with it. So the 5 dimensions are sincerity, excitement, competence, sophistication, and ruggedness. And underneath each one of those dimensions, for instance, sincerity, you're going to run into the words originality, authentic, wholesome. It's often family oriented. There's a whole series of traits that are associated with it. And sometimes we will give these trait words to our stakeholders or to their public so that we're actually able to ask them, which one of these traits best fit this client? And it's interesting because it gives you a perspective from the client side as well as internally. And you're never selling to yourself. So you as smart as you are about your business, your customer is smarter than you sometimes. So you really have to listen to what they say. And if I were to list companies that rank high on sincerity, and by the way, no company is just one of these. You usually have aspects of any of them. So if I were to say sincerity, you're going to run into companies like Coca-Cola, Walt Disney, Hallmark. I don't know if you guys have Hallmark. Campbell's Soup, Pillsbury. These are all companies that are high on family value, high on authenticity, original, so on and so forth. You'll also notice that if you were to take a look at the Hallmark logo and the Disney logo and the Coca-Cola logo, that they are all script. Okay, and this is where designers have to engage in this. And it's not saying that every logo that is sincere or authentic uses script, because it doesn't. But why use script there? Well, script is reminiscent of an autograph. It's that idea of it's my signature, it's my imprimatur, it's my commitment to that brand that it's expressing out there. If I go down to rugged, these are products that are indelible. They are durable. They last a long time. They're a lot of times it has an athletic association to it. A lot of times it may be a highly male-oriented category, but it's not always. Levi's fall into that category, but Levi's seldom men and women. Caterpillar Tractors, Dodge Ram, Timberland, Duluth Trading, these are all brands that fall into that. So if I take a look down there, you're going to find that typically if there's a word mark associated with it, it's going to be a little bit more structured. It's going to be a little bit heavier. It's going to carry some weight. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go back up to sincerity. I've got this script and I've got weight down here. Now, your consumer and your client aren't going to be able to verbalize to you, I think I need a scripty logo.
Yeah.
But as a designer, because we understand what identifies these various traits associated with each of the dimensions, we're able to kind of go into competence and say competency. It doesn't need to be real heavy. It's probably going to be kind of nondescript. It doesn't need to be flourishy. It doesn't need to be exciting, because competent just means I'm pressing the button and it's going to turn on every time. It's going to be my FedEx, my UPS, my DHL, my Maytag, my Lexus, these are all products that fit into that competence category. And what you have to do is ultimately say, which of these am I? And if you take something like Nike fits into 2 categories. It fits into ruggedness in there, and it fits into excitement. And it has a little bit of competence. So then a designer can start to say, okay, if I can take those traits that are associated with excitement, with ruggedness, and with competence, I can really start to play that. It's not sophisticated. So if I start working with serif fonts and wide spacing them and kerning them out, I'm going the wrong way. Mm-hmm. I've got to, so these are all of these things that come out of, and I'm realizing I'm getting far deeper in this than you want.
That's great. That's great.
But this is how you intelligently build a brand. There's a lot of different ways you do it intelligently. This is one that really it gives you that information you need to be able to go back to the client and charge more money because they understand that you understand what you're doing.
Yeah, totally. And I think that plays into, well, I use a simpler tool, like a brand personality matrix, more or less. It's
Yeah.
like, are you masculine or feminine? You just drag the slider. So it's kind of a simpler way of kind of doing what you're doing there. But if you have design background, obviously you can bridge the gap between what they're saying and putting it into a design. So that's exactly what you're talking about. And I hadn't actually used those 5 categories you mentioned there. So I'm definitely going to look it up. I have come across brand archetypes, which sounds a little bit similar. There are more of them, but it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more fluffy, I guess.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on them because I saw your face there when I mentioned them. So
Yeah, no, you know what? I'm not very good with the pole that you pole vault with, but I've seen people that do it really beautifully. So the tool that you use, if you're comfortable with it and if you can do great things with it, excellent.
exactly.
Brand archetypes, I think you used the word fluffy in there, and I was agreeing. Yes, they're kind of fluffy. It is, and we've worked through brand archetypes before,
Yeah.
and frankly, what it's doing is it's taking all the traits which fall underneath brand dimensions and breaking them down individually to a degree. I don't know if when you do brand archetypes, there's a number of different models out there. Some that kind of come back and they say, well, you're a cross between Sherlock Holmes and Mr. Miyagi, and it's, you're kind of, but it helps people get a picture.
It does. Yeah.
But unless you can draw Mr. Miyagi wearing one of those little Sherlock Holmes hats and a little pipe, meerschaum,
That's a new show right there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for the insight on that. I think that'll be pretty useful, and I'll share the link to that as well.
Yeah, it's all over the place. So yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I have so many more questions, so I'm just going to have a quick scan of them to see what's going to resonate. Oh, do you prefer jam or Marmite?
Yeah. Okay. So Marmite is a brand.
Yes. So vegetable yeast extract.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have Vegemite down in Australia.
There's Vegemite, or there's a couple of other brands I understand. Okay.
Vegemite in Australia.
In all honesty, I'm probably a peanut butter fan. Not so much jam, not so much Vegemite, not so much Marmite. I had a hint that this was coming, so I know what Marmite is, but I looked it up because I was kind of going, I wonder what the different brands of Marmite are, and that's when I realized Marmite is a brand that.
Yes. Yeah, it's not my favorite. Vegemite, on the other hand, I eat it quite regularly. Have you tried that?
Is Vegemite made by Marmite?
No, they're different brands. They're slightly different tastes. So Vegemite was Australian, not so much anymore. I think they got bought out, but it's a staple in Australia.
Yeah, I have tasted it. It's fine.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. The problem is that people spread it on like peanut butter, where it's meant to be extremely thin. So that's where the people try it and they just use too much and they're like, yuck. But no, you need a ton. You need a ton of butter and just a very small amount. So for next time,
are you going to send me a jar?
I'll send you a jar.
Okay.
I'll send you a jar. Maybe a little capsule, not a jar. You probably chuck that out.
You get to see, and I'll bet I could probably find it across the street at the store. It's probably here.
Perhaps, yeah, perhaps. You'll have to go to a special store. But anyway.
Do they eat Marmite in the UK, or is it just?
Yeah, I think it's more common in the UK. Yeah.
That may be where I had my daughter was a competitive Irish dancer, so we spent a lot of time going back and forth to Ireland. And before I first was introduced to it over there. So.
All right. Well, I'm just there's another great question in here. What was the biggest mind shift in your career, like before and after, and the way you approach design and business?
So, and I talk about this often. So um, I've got 2 degrees. I started out in business, and my first degree is a bachelor's in business, and didn't want to go into the family business, which was real estate appraisal. So I was doing magic, and I thought, I'm going to go play around a little bit more. So I went to school for a design degree, and found out they didn't have much of a program. Came back to Wichita State, where I graduated twice from, and got a fine arts degree. So if you think about the difference between business and fine arts or design is an incredibly subjective field. Business is an incredibly objective field. So the difference, if I walk into a CFO of a company, and I'm getting to your answer here, and I tell them what I'm going to do, the first thing they always ask me is, can you prove to me I'm going to get a return on investment on this? The CFO thinks objectively. If he took 12 accountants and put them in a room and gave them a column of numbers, he is going to expect all of them to come up with exactly the same answer. Objective. Subjective, if he takes 12 designers and throw them into a room and you give them the same challenge, they are going to come up with completely different solutions. And they may all be brilliant. They could be stunning, but all of them are different. Subjective, objective. And as designers, we lose track of the fact that the people that we're selling to are highly objective. And we've got to think through the process that they're thinking about. And they're really looking at this from a dollars and cents. It's back to our conversation about you're willing to pay more for paper than for design.
Totally.
There's greater value. So when you ask me that question about the revelation, it's that when I started my design business, and I've never actually worked for anybody. I started my company out of freelancing. I was freelancing, and I was going around interviewing, and people knew that I did magic. So I'd get to the end of showing my portfolio to them. They'd go, "That's cool. Do a trick." That's when I put the magic away. But when I first started in design, the very first thing I did was I joined a chamber of commerce. The very first thing I did was started joining business organizations, because designers aren't going to hire me. Now, I also started the AIGA chapter in Wichita. So, I mean, I was fully integrated into the design field. But you've got to keep in mind that designers aren't going to hire you. Mm-hmm. Businesses are going to hire you. So you've got to make a shift towards thinking about what they're looking for. And they don't care what shade of blue you're using. They don't. They don't care whether the line is smooth or how much time you spent waxing that little vector so that it really sucks into the edge just right. They're concerned with whether or not it's going to end up selling their product. And designers have to make that shift over to the perspective of the people that they're working for and not of the designer. You're not designing for yourself, you're designing for them. And that really, now it doesn't mean that you can't, and I think we proved this, that you can't design beautiful, because we developed some exquisite programs, because frankly, the thing that we tell people in business is that it's all about the detail, and it's all about consistency. And if everything that comes out of that entity has that same pattern, that same texture, that same color, the same fonts used in the appropriate hierarchy, that same logo, the same type of photography, the same type of, if all of this DNA works together and works consistently, whether it's on their web or on their fleet graphics or on the side of the building or on a major sign, that's going to be the thing that registers in the back of the mind of the consumer, that is going to help them make assumptions. You and I both, unfortunately, but fortunate for us, make shitloads of assumptions. We bank in our industry on assumptions. We want people to assume things because we know that you and I don't have the time to vet every decision we make. When you go to buy a car, they've got two brochures, don't they? They've got one that shows pictures of it driving down the Redwood Forest Coast or whatever, and they've got another one that talks about all the engine mechanics and how many centimeters worth of, yada, yada, yada. You've got to think through the fact that we don't very often go through that detailed information. We make assumptions based a lot off of appearance, don't we? And, we make decisions every day just because we don't have time to vet every decision that's out there. And if all of the details are together, a brand, you start to make assumptions like, well, if they've got that part of their act together, they're probably going to answer their text when I text them. They're probably not going to ask me to help fund the venture. They can fund it. They're probably going to deliver it when they say they're going to deliver it. You can just go on down that list of all the assumptions that we make, not because we know that, but because we believe that based off of the consistency of detail that the designer has built into this brand. And, this is the conversation that we have with a CFO that helps them understand that this value really does come from all the detail that gets built into something. And that when you hand somebody a card that looks like it was run off digitally at the press down at the end of the block, people get that. They don't look at it and say, well, that was run off down at the end of the block. But they look at it and they immediately know this is a cheap card. This was, and that's probably the kind of detail and consistency I can expect from them.
I love the word detail there. It's a good way to look at it. I was going to actually ask how you can measure the effect of branding or the return on investment and how you communicate that to the CFO, for example.
It's funny you're asking me that. This is my third time in the last 24 hours that I'm going to give this answer. I mentioned to you before this that I was talking with Elise Bennon down at Savannah College of Art and Design, who has me speaking to their students here in about a month. And one of the things we're talking about is exactly that topic. And I'm going to suggest two studies that people can look at. One is, are you familiar with the Design Council in the UK? So in the UK, there's an organization called the Design Council, and it's a government organization that really is there to help provide the wherewithal and the resources to the design community. It's how design is done so well in the UK. And they did a study, which was, I believe, started in 1993, and they ran it up until, I think, 2013. No, 2008. And that study, what they did was they picked 63 companies that they referred to as design-centric. And these were companies that put a great deal of thought and effort into the design of their product, the design of their identity and their branding, and just every aspect, detail to their store, to their materials, their sites, was very thought through from a design perspective. And they compared it to the FTSE 100, which is Financial Times Stock Exchange. So it's this very solid group of 100 companies that the UK looks at kind of as, these are the strongest companies that we can offer up. And they found that over that, I think it was about a 15-year period of time, that there was more than a 200% increase in the value of the companies that were in that 63 over the FTSE 100.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, in the year 2003, which is about partway through, the UK went into a recession and there was this dramatic dip in there. And they found those design companies sharply curved out of that recession more quickly than the FTSE 100. So you show that to somebody, and then to follow that up, the Design Management Institute, which is an American organization, did a study, and you can look up Design Management Institute, and you can look up brand value, and it'll get you there. They did a study that ran from 2005 through 2015, 10 years doing the same thing, took a total of 16 companies, this time compared it to the Fortune 500, and not the Fortune 500, S&P 500. And they found that those companies performed at a 211% increase in value over the stocks in the S&P 500. So, you know, when you show numbers like this, and those were companies like Target, Coca-Cola, Herman Miller, Starwood. I could go on and on, but it's, you know, companies that really, Apple, that get design. And a lot of those companies are ones that have a C-level position for design because they value design that much, that it's not just a CMO, not just a marketing officer, but it's, you know, a corporate design officer that's in there. And you show those to, again, somebody who is objective-minded, a client. And no, I can't show you that what I designed for you is going to have that same return on investment because there's too many variables and too many factors. You know, take a look at what's happening right now. I mean, just too many things that go on out there at any one time that you can't take and isolate it, but you can look at a much more macro look at this and start to say, this is generally what happens. And those are probably, I'm one of the few designers that starts out a presentation by showing a graph. And I always kid the designer, I'm going, stick with me on this. And then I get into showing all the pretty stuff. But I have more people that contact me requesting those two graphs, and they're both readily available out there because it just helps their client quickly understand there is value to what they design.
Thank you for that answer. I'm going to get those graphs and put them in my pitch deck next time.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, it's I'm
a pretty surfacey guy, aren't I? I just, you know, I'm just a kidder.
You are. All right. Well, we do have, there's so many questions. We're at an hour, but we'll keep going. I'm not sure how your time's going.
I'm fine.
I want to be, okay, cool. Well, let me see. How do you get your creative juices flowing, and what do you do in a creative block?
And good questions. You know, I see more often our designers taking a look at what other people are doing, you know, for some level of influence. And obviously, that's a go-to answer for anybody, is to just see what other designers are doing. But I'm also a huge believer in looking for influence outside of your own industry. And when I say that, I mean from a design perspective. My interests are really vast, and though I certainly enjoy reading design journals and going on, you know, blogs and websites specifically oriented towards design, you know, I have a fascination with history and antiques and with mythology and technology. I mean, there's so many other areas, and really, when you start to think about where influence comes from, very seldom in our profession do we start a trend, it more often than not comes from an outside source. And I'm going to pair this up with another question I know you had, which is it's this idea of symbology and how do you build meaning into a logo and the likes of it. And it's this. When we design something as a designer, and we're trying to do something that's just unfathomable. Nobody's ever done before. It's kind of a Miles Newland kind of idea. Miles used to be the person that you would go to if you wanted something that was just so far out there. And he always did really brilliant stuff. But when you start to think about it, people have to have a reference for something to be successful. If I design something for a telephony company and people can't fathom where it's coming from, it doesn't mean telephony to them, does it? I mean, you've got to have that point of reference. So when I start doing these design trends, one of my very favorite things to do is to look at semiotics and new symbols that are coming about. If I take a look at my laptop, how many years ago was it that those three little lines at the top of the website meant absolutely nothing? The ones that people refer to as the little hamburger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hamburger.
What you go and click on because you want more information, isn't it? How do we know that? Well, we had to learn it.
Yep.
And if 10 years ago somebody had done a logo that had three little lines in it, somebody would think we've done an equal mark with an extra line to it or something. It was a sandwich. We wouldn't get it. Go back 15 years and imagine somebody drawing a cloud. And what's cloud? Well, cloud was, it's obvious it's going to rain. Well, now it's synonymous with the idea of storage. So, these symbols that your son is going to be looking at on whatever kind of mobile device you give him to keep him occupied.
What's the floppy disk?
Yeah, exactly. He's going to be looking at symbols and images that you're not even familiar with because they've not been designed for your group, your generation. And so you have entire generations that come up that are much more familiar with symbols and elements than we are. There's a wonderful little symbol that comes from all of the graphic comic books, especially the ones from Japan, that has a little X with a line that runs right through the middle of it. And so imagine an X with a horizontal line running through it. So basically almost an asterisk. It means anger, because they had a character that every time he would furrow his brow, you had this little, three lines coming out right here over either eye. And now an entire generation of graphic novel readers use that little symbol to represent anger. Okay, at some point that may or may not enter the general vernacular of what we recognize as a symbol. But just, again, think about all these symbols that are in this, the world is just pregnant with all these symbols right now, that are coming at us because we have so much information we're trying to convey to people, and we're trying to reduce it down to those simple little elements. So my long answer that I'm giving you here is that there should be a fascination with all of these elements that are coming about, which are going to be from somewhere besides design, that designers are going to absorb because the public now recognizes that's what it means. And designers can start to take those symbols and start to retool them so that people can use them to represent companies, or you can use them to represent a graphic style, but it comes from somewhere besides just designers.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. I do the same thing with my process as well, just gathering different bits and pieces from different sources as well.
Yeah.
Um, I think you mentioned your trends there, and we haven't really spoke about the trends. Just to give some context, you release trend reports every year, which you've been doing for many, many years. I follow them all the time. I
And,
share them.
and you've been so generous as to share them with your audience. And you know what, uh, kudos to Jacob, because not only is he a tremendous blogger and a tremendous resource for information in regards to our industry, and literally thousands upon thousands of people look to you for your insights. So you are a good gatherer and disseminator of information and a good thinker. So
Well, thank you,
appreciate that.
and yeah, thank you, and thanks for putting the information out there because, yeah, you are the key resource when it comes to logo design. I don't think there's any place else in the world that has as many logos collected as you, or at least top tier quality. So yeah, you definitely have the insights on the report. So what do you do to get your reports together? I know you have a LinkedIn learning video on this, but just to give some
Sure.
insights
Yeah.
to how you go about conducting these trends and doing the reports.
So um, I say goodbye to my wife and my daughter for a period of time, because I literally come and sit down here, and you can't see, but I've got a large desktop over here that I bury myself in the office for about a 3-week period of time typically. And in a year's time, I think on the last report that we did, we had 35,000 logos that had been uploaded to logolounge.com since the previous report that we had done. And generally, we release these reports in May of each year at the How Design Live conference, which is How Design did this year. It's not, it ain't gonna happen, but we'll still be releasing the report and putting together the videos soon. And we'll release it online, and obviously you can take a look at it through logolounge.com or through Jacob's site, either way on these. But when we put together a report, I literally go through every logo that has been submitted, and I start working chronologically on Logo Lounge, just working backwards. And I've got a big file folder off the side, and I just start dragging off everything that I've not seen a million times before, that has some new nuance, that has some effort to it that I've not seen before in some way. And as I'm doing this, I'm usually able to, I'm sitting here looking to see if I've got it. I've got a scratch pad which sits right along the side of my computer that I end up making little scribbles and notes to myself about certain logos that I've seen and things that I'm noting in there. And then I play the world's largest version of Match Game. I'll take all the logos that I pulled off, and it's typically around a couple of thousand at that point that I pulled out of there, and make these 10 by 10 squares of them, 100 per square. And I pull out a logo and I go, that looks kind of like, there was a little bit of that going on there, and there's a little bit of this, and I start gathering ones that have some of the same aspects to them. And that's how you start to find these little groups of trends that are going on. And I pulled them off on the page just in Illustrator, and I'll pull them down, and I'll throw a name along the side of the cluster to indicate, what I was thinking of when I pulled that one off. And as I'm doing this, some of these trends, I may end up with 60 or 70 different logos in there. Some of them I may just find 2 or 3, and some, in between. And you kind of got to evaluate it and go, man, 60, that's not really a trend, that's happening. I mean, it's happening, but it's a lot of volume. And, 3 might not be enough to really consider it a trend. And this is something that I always point out in regards to the report. And invariably, every year when we drop out the trend report, I will have somebody write me back saying, well, thank God I didn't have a logo in there. I'd hate to be thought of as being trendy. And it is not a trendy report. is a trend report, and I'm reporting on what's happening. And if if you don't know what's happening, you don't know how to evolve, do you?
Sure.
You don't know how to move forward if you don't have a place to move forward from. So you have to know where you are in order to see the trajectory of where something is going, to say, I'm right here right now. I want to be right here. So what do I need to do to this to get to here?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason for these trend reports, is so that people can just see these things that are going on and going, wow, okay, I know how I can press that to the future. And that's where, these ideas come about from. But we ultimately end up reducing that group of all those clusters down to usually about 40 or 50. And we go out to a group of designers that we've got trust and respect in, that we've worked with for years, or new ones, and say, which of these do you think are going to have the greatest influence? And they come back to us, and we tabulate it up, and we pull out the 15 that tend to be the direction. So I will also tell you that Logo Lounge has tremendous data. It's got great analytics. Internally, we know what people are searching for. We know what people are, we can see in advance. If you think about it, what we do, what you do, is a little bit looking into a crystal ball, because a project you're working on today may not release for another 6 to 9 months. So you know what's going to be happening in 6 to 9 months that the public isn't going to see until that time. When people start searching for work that they're working on, they may be a year in advance of something coming out. So on Logo Lounge, you can search by keyword, you can search by industry, you can search by designer, by geography, a lot of different things. And it's a tremendously valuable tool for getting reference and seeing where people have been, and getting influence. But it tells us that, long before food trucks became the thing, food trucks were being searched out here, because people were coming to designers and saying, I'm going to do a food truck, and I want, so you can start to see things start to curve and graph in there. And we also bring that in the report, so that it's not just subjective, but it's objective as well. And that's how the report kind of comes. And then I write a bunch of snarky shit about the logos that I picked out. And I usually explain why something is happening if I can figure it out.
Yeah.
Not too bad at that, but I often kind of will lambast occasionally certain things that are happening a lot, that I'm kind of going, really, do we really need that many more of these?
Yeah.
So,
I always enjoy the names you come up for each category.
thank you. It's sitting here looking at the sheet that has this year's trends on it, because I've been writing on them. I can.
Well, I think that kind of leads into the next question. I don't think there's anyone better suited to see the future. 70s. Ooh, sneak peek. Sneak peek. So the future of logo design is the 70s. Is that what I just saw?
Oh, well, there was a 70s on there. Now, actually, that was kind of my preamble that I get into. Usually before I really start to go into the report, I'll talk about some of those dominant things that are out there. The thing that you can never do is you can't report on everything that's going on. And invariably people will come back and say, well, what about this? Or what about that? And I'll go, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, they're there. But you've got to pick out those that you think are relevant. And the whole reason for the 70s is there's just been, and I think there's probably a better name for that, but it's just the idea that, I'll pop that back up there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's all these really wonderful marks that everybody's doing that are, I usually just pull out 4 examples, but, that have this incredible kind of reference back to the Yasuburo Kayama books, which
Yeah.
has got in their library. You know, the marks that I cut my teeth on, and you probably cut your teeth on. You know, just beautiful geometry, simplicity, and I think a lot of it's kind of a backlash or a
Mm.
pendulum swing back from this idea of throwing lots of gradients and effects and tricks and gloss and everything
Yeah.
else on the things. And it's some of the very same designers who are going, you know, I've done that. I'm going to get back over here to the purity of form.
Yeah,
That's
and
what,
the pendulum will swing back as well. Like a lot of the big companies are going flat and sans serif and all of that, and there's already a
yep,
little swing back. So it's definitely interesting to see how that all happens.
yep,
And yeah, like you said, you can see in the future.
yeah. I mean, so I think it was 2 years ago that we started reporting serifs swinging back. We did a look at
Mm-hmm.
the stuff that Leyland Mashmeyer was doing with Shabani, Greek yogurt, and the likes. And he came out of Collins brand group, and you know, I give him a lot of credit, but it happened at the same time that Stranger Things was hitting the airwaves, and they had the beautiful title graphics using Vignette as a typeface that, you know, suddenly designers that were from this generation that had been dealing with so much sans serif type were kind of, wow, what are those things hanging off of that T?
Yeah.
Those serifs.
Yes. Yep. That's
And
great.
yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I think we'll. That was a great question to end on, the future of logo design, and I think we can wrap it up here. And I think I just want to close out with saying to people to go check out Logo Lounge, because you have an incredible membership where you can get access to all of these thousands and thousands of logos, and it's definitely worth checking out, as well as staying tuned for your report coming up in May or around then.
It'll be out
And
in May. Just so I'm in there. The call for entries for book 12 closes out May 1st,
oh, great.
and
Yep.
so you've got time to get your logos up in there, and it'll be a mad rush. But I will tell you, we're expanding the book to 3,000 marks this year,
Wow.
which we've never done. We've got 10 amazing judges this year, so
Cool.
I'm really pumped.
I look forward to it too. So, thank you so much for your time, mate. It was great talking to you and hearing your insights. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your friendship. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill.
You bet.